The morning Wren Calloway finally turned 18, the birthday she had been dreading for months, was the color of ash. October 15th arrived without ceremony. No streamers hung from doorways, no candles waited to be blown out, no voices gathered to sing the familiar words that mark the passage from childhood to something else entirely. There was only the thin gray light of a Montana autumn pressing against the window of her shared room, and the weight of knowing that by sunset she would no longer have a place to call home. She had been 17 for what felt like forever, watching the calendar with growing dread as the inevitable day approached. In the foster care system, 18 was not a celebration. It was an expulsion. The machine that had processed her for 2 years would finally spit her out, and she would have to face a world that had no place prepared for her. Wren sat on the edge of her narrow bed watching the light strengthen outside. Across the room, her younger brother Ezra still slept, his 14-year-old frame curled beneath a thin blanket. His sketchbook lay open on the small table beside him, filled with the drawings that had become his way of speaking when words failed. He drew houses mostly. Houses with wide porches and gardens, houses with smoke curling from chimneys, houses that existed nowhere but in the country of his imagination. But there was one image that appeared more than any other. A farmhouse with a tall windmill beside it, its blades reaching toward a sky he had filled with carefully shaded clouds. He had drawn it dozens of times over the past 2 years. Always the same house, always the same windmill, though he had never seen such a place in his life. Wren had asked him once why he kept drawing it. Ezra had just shrugged his eyes, distant in that way they often were now. "It feels like somewhere I'm supposed to go," he had said. That was all. He rarely spoke more than a few words at a time these days. The silence had settled into him after their parents died, filling the spaces where a normal 14-year-old's chatter should have been. She would have to wake him soon. She would have to tell him that today was the day she had been dreading, the day they had both been pretending would never come. The door to their room opened without a knock. Mrs. Whitmore stood in the hallway, her face arranged in the expression Wren had come to recognize over the past 2 years. It was the look adults wore when they were about to deliver news that would hurt, when they had already made peace with the pain they were about to cause because they had convinced themselves it was necessary. Wren. Happy birthday. The words were kind enough, but they landed like stones. I need you to come to my office. There are some things we need to discuss, and something that arrived for you. Something that arrived. A flicker of confusion stirred beneath the heavy blanket of resignation. Nothing ever arrived for her. She had no one left to send anything. Her parents were dead. Her grandparents had passed years before that. There were no aunts or uncles, no family friends who had kept in touch. She and Ezra were alone in the world, 2 leaves blown loose from a tree that no longer existed. She followed Mrs. Whitmore down the corridor past the common room where a few early risers sat staring at a television no one was really watching. Past the kitchen where breakfast was being prepared with the mechanical efficiency of an institution that had long ago stopped thinking about the people it fed. The facility was clean and functional and utterly devoid of anything that might be mistaken for warmth. It was a waiting room for children whose lives had been interrupted, a holding pattern until the world decided what to do with them. Mrs. Whitmore's office was small and cluttered with files. A single window looked out over the parking lot where Wren had watched countless children arrive and leave their faces cycling through the same progression of fear and hope and eventual resignation. Soon she would join that procession, walking out through those doors with nothing but what she could carry. "Sit down, Wren." She sat. Her hands folded themselves in her lap, a habit she had developed over 2 years of meetings with caseworkers and counselors and judges. Stillness was armor. Stillness was invisibility. Mrs. Whitmore opened a drawer and withdrew a manila folder. "You know what today means. We've discussed it. Once you turn 18, you age out of the system. There are resources available to you. Shelters, job training programs. I've put together a list." The words washed over Wren like water over stone. She had heard them before in various configurations spoken by various well-meaning adults who had long ago accepted that good intentions were not the same as solutions. But there's something else. Mrs. Whitmore's voice shifted, taking on a note of uncertainty that Wren had never heard from her before. Something unusual. She reached into the drawer again and withdrew an envelope. It was cream-colored heavy, sealed with a wax stamp that bore an unfamiliar insignia. Wren's name was written across the front in a handwriting that made her breath stop in her chest. She knew that handwriting. She knew the particular way the letters looped and curved, the slight leftward slant, the decorative flourish on the capital C of Callaway. She had seen it on grocery lists and permission slips and birthday cards. She had seen it on the last note her mother ever wrote, a simple message left on the kitchen counter the morning of the accident. Back by dinner. Love you both. But that was impossible. Her mother had been dead for 2 years. Her mother's handwriting existed now only in memory in the few precious documents Wren had managed to save from the wreckage of their former life. This was left with your file when you entered the system, Mrs. Whitmore explained, watching Wren's face carefully. There were instructions attached. It was only to be given to you on your 18th birthday, not before. Wren reached for the envelope. Her fingers were trembling. The paper felt substantial, weighted with something more than just the physical contents within. It felt like a message from a ghost. She broke the wax seal. Inside, there were 3 things. First, a key. It was made of iron, old-fashioned and heavy, with rust blooming in the crevices of its ornate bow. It looked like something from another century, something that might unlock a door in a fairy tale. Second, a document. Official-looking, printed on legal paper. The words at the top read, "Claim Deed." Below that, a description of property. 5 acres in a place called Driftwood, Montana, including a dwelling and appurtenances and 1 windmill. The purchase price listed was $5. Third, a letter, 2 pages covered in her mother's handwriting. "My dearest Wren," it began. "If you are reading this, then everything we feared has come to pass, and I am so deeply sorry. I'm sorry we will not be there to see you become the remarkable woman I know you will be. I'm sorry we had to leave you and Ezra alone in a world that can be so cruel to children without parents to protect them. But there are things you need to know, things we could not tell you before, because knowing would have put you in danger. The truth, my darling girl, is that we did not simply die. We did not just have an accident on a rainy road. We were killed. And if you want to understand why you need to go to Driftwood." Wren stopped reading. The words blurred before her eyes as tears she had been holding back for 2 years finally began to fall. She could hear her mother's voice in every sentence, could feel her presence in every carefully chosen word. For 2 years she had believed she was alone. For 2 years she had believed her parents had simply been victims of bad luck, of slick roads, and poor visibility, of the random cruelty of a universe that did not care about the children it orphaned. But this letter told a different story. She forced herself to continue reading. The property in Driftwood belonged to us. We bought it secretly through a trust using cash we had been saving for years. We were going to take you and Ezra there. We were going to start over, far away from everything that threatened us, the windmill, the house, the land. It was meant to be our new beginning. We ran out of time. But the property is yours now, Wren, legally, irrevocably yours. The key unlocks the front door. The deed transfers automatically on your 18th birthday. There's a lawyer named Aldrich Pemberton who helped us set everything up. His contact information is enclosed. He can explain the legalities. But the most important thing is this. Go to Driftwood. Go to the house. In the cellar there is an old milk can. Everything you need to understand is inside. The truth about what we discovered, the truth about why we had to die, the truth that might be dangerous to know, but which you deserve to have. Your father discovered something terrible, Wren. He was working as a geological engineer for a company called Black Ridge Mining. They hired him to conduct surveys on land they were planning to develop. But what he found was not what they expected. The land was poisoned. For years, Black Ridge had been secretly dumping toxic waste in rural areas across the state. The chemicals seeped into the groundwater, contaminating wells and aquifers, making people sick. Your father found evidence of this contamination in 5 different counties. Thousands of people were being slowly poisoned, and Blackridge was covering it up. He tried to do the right thing. He went to his supervisors. He filed reports. He gathered evidence. He documented everything on a hard drive that he kept hidden. He was going to blow the whistle to expose what they had done. But Blackridge is a powerful company with powerful friends. They found out what your father was planning, and they made it very clear what would happen to our family if he went public. They threatened you, Wren. They threatened Ezra. They knew your names, your school, your routines. They made us understand that there was nowhere we could go, nothing we could do that would protect you from their reach. We were terrified. The police were useless. Blackridge had people everywhere, in every department, every level of government. Our only option was to disappear, to create a new life somewhere they would never find us. This land was supposed to be that somewhere. We bought it secretly through a trust using cash that could not be traced. We were days away from bringing you here, from starting over in Driftwood, where no one would ever think to look. But they found out. And they decided that dead whistleblowers were safer than disappeared ones. The car crash that killed us was not an accident, Wren. There was nothing wrong with our tires. They ran us off the road. They murdered us because your father had the courage to tell the truth. But they made a mistake. They thought the evidence died with us. They did not know about the hard drive, about the backup copies your father made, about the lawyer who has been safeguarding everything until you were old enough to decide what to do. That choice is now yours. The money in the milk can is everything we saved. It is meant to help you start over, to fix the house, to build the life we wanted to give you. Take it, use it, make a home there for yourself and Ezra. Or if you choose, use it to fight. The hard drive with all of your father's evidence is in a secure location. The lawyer Aldrich Pemberton has the key and the password. With what is on that drive, you could expose Blackridge. You could bring them down. You could get justice for everyone they have hurt, including us. But know this. If you choose to fight, they will come after you. They will threaten you, try to discredit you, do everything in their power to silence you, just as they silenced us. It will be dangerous. It may be the hardest thing you ever do. The choice is yours, my darling girl. The safe path that leads away from here, or the hard path that leads to truth. Whatever you decide, know that we loved you more than words can express. We did everything we did because you and Ezra were our whole world. Protect each other, take care of each other, and never, ever let them take away the future we tried to give you. All my love forever. Mom Wren sat in that cramped office for a long time, the pages trembling in her hands. Mrs. Whitmore said nothing, perhaps sensing that there are moments in a young person's life when silence is the only appropriate response. The morning light shifted and strengthened outside the window. Somewhere in the facility, a bell rang, signaling the start of breakfast. The ordinary machinery of institutional life continued its indifferent rotation. But for Wren, everything had changed. She had believed herself to be a victim of random tragedy, an orphan created by nothing more than bad weather and bad luck. But her mother's letter painted a different picture entirely. Conspiracy, murder, secrets buried in a cellar in a town she had never heard of. It should have seemed impossible. It should have seemed like the ravings of a troubled mind, a final letter written by a woman who had perhaps lost touch with reality. But Wren knew her mother. Evangeline Calloway had been many things: warm, creative, fiercely protective of her children. But she had never been prone to fantasy. She had been practical and grounded, the kind of woman who believed in evidence and reason. If she said they had been killed, it was because she believed it to be true. And that meant Wren's entire understanding of the last 2 years had been built on a lie. She looked up at Mrs. Whitmore, who was watching her with an expression of carefully controlled concern. "Is there money?" the woman asked gently. "For transportation?" "For food." Wren checked the envelope. Tucked behind the deed was a cashier's check for $500 and a card with the lawyer's information. Aldrich Pemberton, attorney at law, a phone number, an address in some distant city. "There is enough." Mrs. Whitmore nodded slowly. "You understand that once you leave here, there is no coming back. The system does not work that way. You will be on your own." I understand. But even as she said it, Wren was thinking about Ezra. Ezra, who was still sleeping in their shared room, who had no idea that in a few hours his sister would walk out of this facility and leave him behind. Ezra, who had already lost so much, who had retreated so far into his drawings and his silence, that sometimes Wren worried she was losing him too. She could not take him with her. The law was clear on that point. He was 14 years old, a minor, a ward of the state. She had no legal right to remove him from the system's care. She had no home to offer him, no income, no stability. She was in the eyes of the world just another aged-out foster kid with a bus pass and a list of shelters. But the letter changed things. The deed changed things. If there really was a house waiting for her in Driftwood, if there really was land and a windmill and some kind of future buried in a cellar in Montana, then maybe, just maybe, she could build something worth coming back for. The goodbye was the hardest thing Wren had ever done. She found Ezra in the common room, hunched over his sketchbook, his pencil moving across the page with the focused intensity that always came over him when he was drawing. He looked up when she approached, and something in her face must have told him what was coming, because his hand stilled and his eyes went wide and dark. "Today," he said. It was not a question. Today. She sat down beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. On the page before him was another house. This one had a windmill beside it, its great blade stretching toward a sky he had filled with carefully shaded clouds. She wondered if he had somehow known, if some part of him had sensed the shape of what was waiting. "I found something out," she said quietly. "About Mom and Dad. About what really happened to them." He was listening. She could tell by the way his breathing changed, by the subtle tension that crept into his thin shoulders. "There is a place. A house that belongs to us." "They bought it for us, Ezra. They were going to take us there." She paused, struggling to find words that would not sound insane. "I think the answers are there. I think if I go, I might be able to understand. You are leaving. I have to." She took his hand, felt how small and cold his fingers were. "But I'm coming back for you. I'm going to make a place for us, a real place. And when it is ready, when I can prove to the court that I have a home and a life and everything they need to see, I'm coming back, and I'm getting you out of here." He did not say anything. He rarely did these days, but he reached into his sketchbook and carefully tore out the page with the windmill house. He pressed it into her palm. "I drew it," he said quietly, "before I knew. I just drew it." She looked at the picture. The house in his drawing looked nothing like the facility, nothing like any place they had ever lived. It looked like something from a dream, a vision of safety and permanence conjured from the depths of a 14-year-old's longing. She folded it carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of her jacket close to her heart. "I will call when I can," she promised. "I will write. And I will come back for you, Ezra. I swear it." He nodded. His eyes were bright with tears he was too proud to let fall. She hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of him, memorizing the feel of his arms around her. Then she let go and walked away, out of the common room, down the corridor, through the front doors, and into the gray October morning. She did not look back. She was afraid that if she looked back, she would never be able to leave. Wren stepped onto the bus, clutching the envelope that held her mother's last words. Behind her, somewhere in that brick building, Ezra was watching from a window she could not see. She had made him a promise. But promises are fragile things, easily broken by circumstances beyond our control. As the bus pulled away from the station, taking Wren toward a future she could not imagine, consider this. Have you ever had to leave someone you loved behind, trusting that the separation was temporary? Have you ever carried a promise like a weight in your chest, knowing that everything depended on your ability to keep it? The bus to Cedar Hollow departed at noon from a station downtown. Wren bought her ticket with some of the money from the envelope and found a seat near the back, pressing herself against the window as the city began to slide away. She had never been particularly attached to this place. It was just another stop on the long, disorienting journey through the foster care system. but watching it recede through the grimy glass still felt like losing something. She was leaving behind the only world she knew. Broken as it was, indifferent as it had been, it was at least familiar. It had rules, she understood patterns she had learned to navigate. What lay ahead was entirely unknown. The bus groaned and shuddered, pulling onto the highway. Other passengers settled into their seats with the resigned patience of people who had grown accustomed to long journeys. Wren pulled out her mother's letter and read it again, searching the familiar handwriting for clues she might have missed. The truth about what we discovered, the truth about why we had to die. Her father, Marcus Calloway, had been a geological engineer. She remembered that much from the before time, from the years when their family had been whole and intact. He had worked for various companies over the years, conducting surveys and assessments, evaluating land for development or mining. It had seemed like ordinary work, the kind of job that put food on the table without generating much excitement. But perhaps it had not been ordinary at all. Perhaps he had seen something he was not supposed to see, discovered something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The letter mentioned a company, Black Ridge Mining. Wren had never heard the name before, but as the bus carried her further into the Montana wilderness, she found herself turning it over in her mind like a stone with sharp edges. Black Ridge Mining. What had they done that was worth killing for? The journey took 10 hours. Wren watched the landscape transform through the window as the afternoon faded into evening. The urban sprawl gave way to suburbs, then to farmland, then to the vast empty spaces that define this part of the country. Rolling hills covered in yellow grass, thick forests of pine and spruce pressing close to the road, distant mountains wearing caps of early snow. She had never seen country like this before. The foster homes that had cycled her through the system had all been located in cities or suburbs, places where humans had tamed the land and imposed their order upon it. This was something different. This was wilderness, ancient and indifferent, a reminder that the world had existed for a very long time before people arrived and would continue long after they were gone. As darkness fell, she pulled out Ezra's drawing and studied it in the fading light. The windmill he had drawn rose tall and proud beside the little house, its blades reaching toward the sky. He had added details she had not noticed at first. Flowers in a garden, smoke rising from a chimney, two small figures standing hand in hand in the doorway. She folded the picture carefully and returned it to her pocket. The bus pulled into Cedar Hollow just after 10. It was hardly a town at all, just a gas station, a diner with a neon sign that buzzed and flickered, and a small shelter where a few wooden benches provided waiting passengers with somewhere to sit. A single street lamp cast a pool of yellow light that seemed only to deepen the darkness around it. Wren stepped off the bus and the cold hit her immediately. Montana cold was different from city cold. It was cleaner, sharper, carrying with it the scent of pine needles and distant snow. She pulled her jacket tighter and looked around. According to the notes she had found with her mother's letter, Driftwood was approximately 2 miles to the east. There was no public transportation, no taxi service, nothing but a narrow road that disappeared into the darkness between the trees. She started walking. The road to Driftwood was unpaved, rutted with old tire tracks and overgrown with weeds that brushed against her legs as she walked. The cheap flashlight she had purchased at the bus station with some of her remaining money cut a thin beam through the darkness, illuminating only a few feet ahead. The woods pressed close on either side, alive with the sounds of creatures she could not see. Rustling in the underbrush, the distant call of an owl, the occasional snap of a branch that made her jump. She had never been so alone. The foster care system, for all its flaws, had always provided the presence of other people. There had always been someone nearby, even if that someone was indifferent or unkind. But here on this dark road in the middle of nowhere, there was no one. Just Wren and the night and the unknown that waited at the end of the path. She found herself thinking about her mother. Evangeline Calloway had been a nurse working in a small clinic in the town where they lived before everything fell apart. She had been good at her job, patient and kind with people who were frightened or in pain. She had brought that same gentleness home with her, wrapping her children in a warmth that had made the world feel safe. But there had been another side to her too. a fiercer side that emerged when her family was threatened. Wren remembered a time when she was 10 years old and a boy at school had been bullying Ezra. Her mother had gone to the school the next day and spoken to the principal in a voice that was perfectly calm and utterly terrifying. The bullying had stopped immediately. That was the woman who had written this letter, the woman who had seen a threat to her family and had done everything in her power to protect them. Even if it meant keeping secrets, even if it meant planning an escape to a place no one knew about, even if it meant dying before that escape could happen. Wren walked faster, her footsteps crunching on the gravel. After what felt like hours, she saw the sign. It was wooden, half swallowed by ivy, the paint faded and peeling, but she could still make out the words. Welcome to Driftwood. The town, if it could be called that, was little more than a crossroads. A church with boarded windows, a handful of houses dark and seemingly abandoned, a gas station with pumps that looked like they had not dispensed fuel in decades. It was a ghost of a place, a community that had died so slowly that no one had bothered to notice. Miller Road was a dirt track branching off the main path, more suggestion than actual road. Wren turned onto it, her flashlight beam dancing nervously across the rutted surface. And then she saw it. Rising against the star-scattered sky, silhouetted like something from a dream, stood the Windmill. The structure rose taller than she had imagined, a skeletal metal giant, its blades frozen in place at odd angles. 20 years of neglect had transformed it into a monument to abandonment. Rust bloomed across its surface. Several blades were bent or broken. It stood perfectly still in the night air, as though it had forgotten how to move. Beside it, set back from the road, was the house. Wren's heart sank. The photographs in her imagination, the cozy dwelling she had allowed herself to hope for, bore no resemblance to the reality before her. This was a ruin. The porch roof sagged dangerously, held up by columns that had rotted through in places. The windows were broken, their glass scattered across the overgrown yard like jagged tears. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood beneath gray and weathered, aged by decades of Montana winters. This was her inheritance, this pile of splinters and rust, this monument to failed dreams. She wanted to turn around. She wanted to walk back to Cedar Hollow and catch the next bus to anywhere else. She wanted to find a warm room somewhere and pretend that this night had never happened, that her mother's letter had never existed, that she was just another aged-out foster kid with no past worth investigating and no future worth fighting for. But then she thought of Ezra. She thought of his face when she had said goodbye, the desperate hope he had been trying so hard to hide. She thought of the picture he had drawn, the Windmill house that had somehow appeared on his page before she even knew such a place existed. She thought of the promise she had made. I'm coming back for you. Wren walked up the overgrown path to the front door. The steps groaned beneath her weight, threatening to give way. The door itself was swollen in its frame, the wood warped by years of moisture and neglect. But the lock was sturdy, a heavy iron mechanism that looked like it belonged in another century. She pulled the key from her pocket. It slid into the lock with a gritty metallic sound. For a moment, nothing happened. She jiggled the key, pressed her shoulder against the door, twisted with all the strength she possessed. The mechanism resisted. Then, with a shriek of protesting metal that echoed through the silent night, something gave way. The door swung open. The air that rushed out was stale and cold, smelling of dust and decay and something else. Something like time itself, compressed and preserved in this forgotten space. Wren stepped inside, sweeping her flashlight across the room. Dust motes danced in the beam like tiny stars. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling in elaborate configurations. In the center of the room stood a simple wooden table and 2 chairs, all of it covered in a thick layer of gray dust. It looked as though the inhabitants had simply vanished mid-conversation, leaving behind only the furniture and the silence. Her light found the door to the cellar. It was a simple plank door with a small iron latch. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. In the cellar there is an old milk can. Everything you need to understand is inside. Wren's pulse quickened as she approached. She pulled the door open and stared down into perfect blackness. A set of steep stone steps descended into the dark. The air that rose up from below was even colder, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and secrets long buried. She took a deep breath and began her descent. The cellar was small, perhaps 15 feet square, with walls of rough-cut stone that glistened with moisture. Empty shelves lined one side, still holding the dusty ghosts of glass jars that had once contained preserved food. The dirt floor was uneven, packed hard by decades of use. Wren's flashlight beam swept across the space, searching. And there in the far corner, half hidden behind a stack of rotting firewood, she saw it. A large galvanized steel milk can, its surface dulled by time but still intact. Her hands were trembling as she knelt beside it. The lid was sealed tightly, resisting her first attempts to open it. She struggled with it for several minutes, her fingers growing raw from the cold metal, until finally, with a sigh of compressed air, the lid came free. She shone her light inside. The breath stopped in her chest. The can was filled with money. Bundles of cash wrapped in old newspaper and secured with twine stacked carefully in neat rows. Later, she would count it carefully. $50,000, a fortune hidden in a forgotten cellar. More than she could have imagined existing outside of banks and movies. But that was not all. On top of the money sat a waterproof document box, heavy-duty plastic, the kind designed to survive floods and fires. She lifted it out of the can, set it on the dirt floor, and worked the latches open with trembling fingers. Inside, she found letters, dozens of them, all written in her mother's handwriting, addressed to her and Ezra. She found legal documents, thick stacks of paper covered in the dense language of attorneys and courts. She found photographs of her family from before her parents, young and smiling, she and Ezra as children, all of them captured in moments of ordinary happiness that now felt like dispatches from another world. And she found a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. She opened it with careful fingers. On one side was a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. They looked impossibly young, beaming at the camera with the kind of uncomplicated joy that comes before life has taught its hardest lessons. On the other side was a single small space, containing a baby picture of Wren herself. The opposite space was empty. Waiting, she realized with a pang, for a picture of Ezra. She clasped the locket around her neck. It lay against her chest like a talisman, a connection to the people she had lost. Then she turned to the letters. The first one was marked, "Read this first," in her mother's careful hand. "My dearest children, if you are reading this, I hope you are together. I hope you are safe, and I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive us for what we had to do. We did not abandon you. We were trying to save you. Your father discovered something terrible. He was working as a geological engineer for a company called Black Ridge Mining. They hired him to conduct surveys on land they were planning to develop. But what he found was not what they expected. The land was poisoned. For years, Black Ridge had been secretly dumping toxic waste in rural areas across the state. The chemicals seeped into the groundwater, contaminating wells and aquifers, making people sick. Your father found evidence of this contamination in 5 different counties. Thousands of people were being slowly poisoned, and Black Ridge was covering it up. He tried to do the right thing. He went to his supervisors. He filed reports. He gathered evidence, documented everything on a hard drive that he kept hidden. He was going to blow the whistle to expose what they had done. But Black Ridge is a powerful company with powerful friends. They found out what your father was planning. And they made it very clear what would happen to our family if he went public. They threatened you, Wren. They threatened Ezra. They knew your names, your school, your routines. They made us understand that there was nowhere we could go, nothing we could do that would protect you from their reach. We were terrified. The police were useless. Black Ridge had people everywhere, in every department, every level of government. Our only option was to disappear, to create a new life somewhere. They would never find us. This land was supposed to be that somewhere. We bought it secretly through a trust using cash that could not be traced. We were days away from bringing you here, from starting over in Driftwood, where no one would ever think to look. But they found out. and they decided that dead whistleblowers were safer than disappeared ones. The car crash that killed us was not an accident, Wren. There was nothing wrong with our tires. They ran us off the road. They murdered us because your father had the courage to tell the truth. But they made a mistake. They thought the evidence died with us. They did not know about the hard drive, about the backup copies your father made, about the lawyer who has been safeguarding everything until you were old enough to decide what to do. That choice is now yours. The money in this milk can is everything we saved. It is meant to help you start over, to fix this house, to build the life we wanted to give you. Take it. Make a home here for yourself and Ezra, or if you choose, use it to fight. The hard drive with all of your father's evidence is in a secure location. The lawyer Aldrich Pemberton has the key and the password. With what is on that drive, you could expose Blackridge. You could bring them down. You could get justice for everyone they have hurt, including us. But know this, if you choose to fight, they will come after you. They will threaten you, try to discredit you, do everything in their power to silence you, just as they silenced us. It will be dangerous. It may be the hardest thing you ever do. The choice is yours, my darling girl. The safe path that leads away from here, or the hard path that leads to truth. Whatever you decide, know that we loved you more than words can express. We did everything we did because you and Ezra were our whole world. Protect each other, take care of each other, and never ever let them take away the future we tried to give you. All my love forever. Mom. Wren sat on the cold dirt floor of that cellar until the first pale light of dawn began to filter down from above. She read every letter in the box, letting her mother's voice wash over her, absorbing the full weight of what had happened to her family. Her parents had not abandoned them. They had been heroes trying to protect thousands of innocent people from a company that was willing to poison them for profit. And they had paid for that courage with their lives. The grief that moved through Wren was unlike anything she had experienced in the 2 years since the accident. It was not the dull, chronic ache of loss she had grown accustomed to. It was sharp and fresh and devastating, as though she were learning of their deaths for the first time. Because in a way she was. The parents she had mourned were not quite the parents she had lost. The truth was bigger, more terrible, and somehow more beautiful than she had known. They had loved her enough to die for her. And now she had to decide whether she loved them enough to fight for them. She thought about the money piled in the milk can. $50,000. Enough to walk away. Enough to find a small apartment somewhere, get a job, establish the kind of stable life that would allow her to petition for custody of Ezra. She could leave the past buried where it lay, take the easy path, and no one would blame her for it. But as dawn broke over Driftwood and the first birdsong began to filter through the broken windows above, Wren knew that was not who she was. Her father had been a man who did the right thing even when it cost him everything. Her mother had been a woman who faced down threats to her family without flinching. They had raised her to be brave, to stand up for what was right, to protect those who could not protect themselves. She could not honor their memory by running away. She climbed out of the cellar into the dusty main room of the house. Morning light was streaming through the gaps in the boards that covered the windows, casting long golden bars across the floor. In this light, the house did not look quite so desolate. Beneath the dust and decay, she could see the bones of something that had once been beautiful. Something that could be beautiful again. She walked to the front door and stepped out onto the sagging porch. The Montana morning spread before her, vast and golden and full of possibility. The windmill stood tall against the brightening sky, its rusted blades motionless in the still air. Beyond it, the mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with the first pink light of sunrise. She pulled out Ezra's drawing and held it up before her. The house in the picture matched the house before her, every detail, the angle of the roof, the shape of the windows, the way the windmill towered beside it, its blades reaching toward the sky. He had drawn this place before he knew it existed. He had seen it in his mind somehow across miles and years, as though some part of him had always known where they belonged. Wren folded the drawing carefully and returned it to her pocket close to her heart. Then she looked up at the windmill, at the frozen blades that had not turned in 20 years. She thought about the promise she had made to her brother. She thought about the choice her parents had left her. She thought about the company called Black Ridge Mining and the man named Garrett Thornwood, whose voice had threatened her family by name. And standing there in the golden light of a Montana morning, looking out over the land her parents had died trying to give her, Wren Calloway made her decision. She would fix this house, she would make it a home, and she would find the people who had destroyed her family, and she would make them pay. The first week in Driftwood taught Wren things about herself she had never known. She learned that she was stronger than she looked, capable of hauling debris and prying up rotted floorboards with her bare hands. She learned that she could tolerate cold and hunger and exhaustion in ways she had never been tested before. She learned that there was a fierce satisfaction in physical labor in watching the tangible evidence of her work accumulate around her. The $50,000 from the milk can sat in a lockbox under the floorboards she had pried up and replaced. It was more money than she had ever imagined having, but she knew it would need to last. She set aside a careful budget, materials for essential repairs first, then food, then emergency reserves. Every dollar spent was a dollar she might need later for lawyers for Ezra, for whatever came next. She also learned that she knew absolutely nothing about fixing a house. The first morning she stood in the main room, surveying the damage and feeling the full weight of her ignorance. She had never held a hammer. She had never patched a roof or replaced a window, or done any of the 100 tasks that would be required to make this place livable. The institutional life of the foster system had taught her many things: how to survive, how to navigate bureaucracy, how to make herself invisible when necessary. But it had not prepared her for this. On the second day, she explored the property more thoroughly, searching for anything that might help. Behind the main house stood a barn she had barely noticed in the darkness of her arrival. Its doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, but the structure itself was surprisingly sound, and inside, she found her father's workshop. Walking into that space felt like stepping into a shrine. His tools hung in neat rows on a pegboard, each one in its designated place. A workbench ran along one wall, its surface worn smooth by years of use. Sawdust still covered the floor in places, as though he had just stepped out and would be back any moment. The air smelled of old wood and machine oil scents that triggered memories she had thought were lost forever. She remembered being 6 years old, sitting on a stool in a garage somewhere, watching her father work. He had been building a birdhouse, she recalled. A simple project, but he had approached it with the same care and precision he brought to everything. Every measurement exact, every joint tight and true. She had asked him once why he was so careful about something so small. Because the small things matter, he had said. Because if you do the small things right, the big things take care of themselves. Taped to the underside of a shelf protected from dust and moisture, she found a stack of notebooks. They were instructional journals, she realized as she began to page through them. Her father had written them himself, filling page after page with detailed explanations of how to perform various repairs, how to patch a leaking roof, how to replace a broken window pane, how to shore up a sagging porch, step-by-step instructions accompanied by careful diagrams written in the same neat hand that had once helped her with her math homework. It was as though he had known, as though he had somehow anticipated that his daughter might one day find herself alone in this place, needing to learn everything from scratch. He had left her a guide. Wren wept over those notebooks for a long time. Then she dried her eyes, selected the first journal, and got to work. The days that followed blurred together into a rhythm of labor and exhaustion. She rose with the sun and worked until her body refused to continue. She taught herself to swing a hammer, to drive nails straight, to measure twice and cut once. Her hands blistered and bled and eventually began to callous. Her muscles screamed in protest, then slowly strengthened. She started with the porch, following her father's instructions page by page. The rotted columns came down first, and she braced the roof temporarily with lumber she salvaged from the collapsed storage shed. Then she cut new columns from logs she found stacked behind the barn, shaping them with an axe and a draw knife until they fit the specifications in the notebook. It was slow work, clumsy work. Her first attempts were laughable, and more than once she had to tear out what she had done and start over. But gradually, painfully, she began to improve. By the end of the first week, the porch no longer sagged. It was not beautiful. The columns were rough-hewn and slightly uneven. The new boards a different color from the weathered originals. But it was solid. It would hold. She stood on it the evening of the 7th day, testing her weight on the boards, feeling them support her without complaint. It was the first thing she had ever built in her life. On the 3rd day, she made her first trip into town. The only functioning business in Driftwood was Becker's General Store, a weathered building that sold a little bit of everything: hardware, groceries, first aid supplies, hunting licenses. It looked like it had been standing since the town's founding and fully intended to outlast whatever came next. The man behind the counter matched the establishment. Harlan Becker was in his 70s with a face like crumpled leather and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He watched Wren as she approached, his expression giving nothing away. White hair cropped short, hands gnarled by decades of work, a stillness about him that spoke of patience hard-earned. "You are the girl at the old Calloway place." It was not a question. In a town this small, everyone knew everyone's business, even if no one talked about it. "I am." She set her items on the counter: nails, a new pane of glass, sandpaper, bread, peanut butter, batteries. He rang them up in silence, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Heard someone was fixing it up. He paused, studying her. "That windmill has not turned in 20 years. "I know." "You know what you're getting into? The place has been empty a long time. A lot of work to make it livable." "I know that too." He looked at her for a long moment, and Wren had the strange sensation of being weighed and measured, of being assessed against some standard she could not see. Then he reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy, old-fashioned flip phone. "It is a burner," he said, sliding it across to her. "Untraceable. My number is the only one in it." Wren stared at the phone, then at the old man. "Why, your parents were good people. They did not deserve what happened to them." His voice was flat, betraying no emotion, but his eyes told a different story. "This town has a long memory. Some of us remember why they really came here, what they were running from." He said nothing more, just returned to his work, leaving Wren to gather her purchases and her questions. She was almost out the door when his voice stopped her. "My son died of cancer 12 years ago." She turned back. Harlan was not looking at her. His hands had stilled on the counter and his gaze was fixed on something far away. Something only he could see. 32 years old. Healthy as a horse, dead in 6 months. His voice was steady, but there was a weight beneath the words that made them heavy as stones. The doctors could not explain it, but I could. The well water on our property turned bad the year before. We didn't know it was poison until it was too late. Wren's heart was pounding now. "Blackridge," she said quietly. "Blackridge." The word hung in the air between them like an accusation. "Your father was the first person to ever put a name to what happened here. The first person to find proof." Harlan finally looked up, and his eyes were hard as flint. "And they killed him for it." Wren walked back to the farmhouse with the burner phone heavy in her pocket and a new understanding settling into her bones. She was not the only one in Driftwood with reason to hate Blackridge Mining. She was not the only one who had lost someone to their greed. The question was, what was she going to do about it? The answer came on the 8th day. Wren had spent the morning patching the roof using her father's journals as a guide, learning through trial and error how to spread tar and secure shingles. Her hands were blistered and her back ached, but there was a small, fierce satisfaction in seeing the work take shape. Every board she replaced, every leak she sealed was a victory against the decay that had claimed this place. She was on her way back from the barn when she saw the unfamiliar car parked at the end of the drive. It was a rental, clean and anonymous, moving slowly up the dirt road toward the house, and she set down her hammer and watched it come, a cold knot forming in her stomach. A man got out. He was middle-aged, wearing a suit that cost more than everything Wren owned combined. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who is accustomed to getting what he wanted. Dark hair slicked back, smile that showed too many teeth, eyes that calculated rather than connected. Miss Calloway. His smile did not reach his eyes. I am Sterling Locke, representing certain parties who have an interest in this property. I was hoping we might talk. I know who you represent. If her bluntness surprised him, he did not show it. Then you know we are prepared to make you a very generous offer. This land, this house. They are more trouble than they are worth. The repairs alone would cost a fortune. But my clients are willing to take it off your hands. He paused, letting the number land with calculated precision. $2 million, Miss Calloway. That is enough to set yourself up for life. Find a nice apartment somewhere, go to college, build whatever future you want. $2 million. The number hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. A clean apartment in a safe city. College for both her and Ezra. A life without fear. It would solve every problem she faced. She could get Ezra out of the foster system immediately. She could give them both the stable, comfortable life that had been taken from them 2 years ago. All she had to do was walk away from her parents' legacy. All she had to do was let the men who killed them win. No. Locke's smile flickered. I beg your pardon, I said no. This land belonged to my parents. They died trying to protect it, trying to protect the people that your company has been poisoning for years. And I'm not going to sell it to you so you can bury the evidence along with everything else. For a moment, something ugly moved behind Locke's pleasant facade. A flash of something cold and dangerous that was there and gone before she could fully register it. Then the mask slid back into place. I see. Well, that is unfortunate. I do hope you will reconsider, Miss Calloway. The offer will not stay on the table forever. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card. In case you change your mind. He left without another word. Wren watched the sedan disappear down the road, her pulse racing, her hands trembling at her sides. That night, someone set fire to the old storage shed at the edge of the property. Wren woke to the smell of smoke and the orange glow of flames reflecting off her bedroom ceiling. By the time she got outside with buckets of water from the creek, the shed was already engulfed. She could only stand and watch as it burned, the flames casting wild orange light across the motionless windmill tower behind her. A message, a warning. In the morning, she found a note pinned to the front door. Last chance. Sell or learn what happens to people who do not know when to quit. Wren read the note 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and added it to the growing file of evidence in her mother's document box. They wanted her to be afraid. They wanted her to run. They had badly misjudged who they were dealing with. The days that followed took on a rhythm of their own. Mornings were for work on the house. Wren attacked the repairs with a fury born of defiance, channeling her anger into physical labor. Every board she replaced, every window she installed, every inch of progress she made was a message to Blackridge and their threats. I am still here. I'm not going anywhere. On the 10th day, Harlan's granddaughter arrived. Wren was replacing a broken window when she heard the car approaching. She set down her tools and walked around to the front of the house, half expecting to see another expensive sedan, another messenger from Blackridge. But the vehicle that pulled up the drive was an old pickup truck, rust-spotted and road-weary. And the young woman who climbed out of it was nothing like Sterling Locke. She was about 20, with bright, intelligent eyes and a messenger bag slung over one shoulder. She moved with the slightly frazzled energy of someone who had just driven a long way. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, jeans and a flannel shirt, boots that had seen actual use. You are Wren Calloway, another statement, not a question. I am Marin. My grandfather sent me. Grandfather, Harlan. He called me at school, told me there was someone I needed to meet. She pushed off from the truck and walked toward Wren, her gaze sweeping over the property with undisguised curiosity. I am a journalism major, 2nd year. My grandfather has been telling me about Blackridge mining since I was old enough to understand what the words meant. Something shifted in Wren's chest. He told you about my parents. He told me about the evidence they collected. And he told me you have a hard drive that could bring down one of the most corrupt companies in Montana. Marin's eyes met hers, and there was a fierce intelligence in them, a hunger for justice that Wren recognized because she felt it herself. "I want to help." They worked together over the next several days. Marin had a laptop, a skill with technology that Wren lacked, and a relentless determination that reminded Wren of herself. But she understood instinctively that this was Wren's fight. She offered her abilities as tools, not as leadership. Every decision remained with Wren. Marin contacted Pemberton the lawyer and arranged for the hard drive to be couriered to a secure location where they could retrieve it. Then she set up encrypted cloud storage backup copies in multiple locations, firewalls, and protections that would make it impossible for anyone to erase what they found. "Your father was smart," Marin said one evening, looking up from her laptop. "He made copies of everything, stored them in different places. Even if they had found the original drive, the evidence would have survived." "He was an engineer," Wren said quietly. "He believed in redundancy." She was thinking of the notebooks in the workshop, the careful instructions, the way he had prepared for a future he must have known he might not live to see. On the 15th day, the hard drive arrived. Pemberton sent it through a courier service heavily encrypted, addressed to a post office box in Cedar Hollow that Marin had set up under a false name. They retrieved it together, drove back to the farmhouse in tense silence, and opened it on the kitchen table that Wren had scrubbed clean. The contents were everything her mother's letter had promised, and more. Spreadsheets documenting illegal dumping sites across 5 counties, internal memos authorizing the disposal of toxic chemicals in rural areas, email chains between executives discussing how to handle Marcus Calloway after he began asking uncomfortable questions, falsified environmental reports submitted to state regulators, evidence of bribes paid to local officials, and the audio files. There were dozens of them. Her father had secretly recorded his meetings with his supervisors, documenting their threats and their admissions of guilt. Wren listened to them with her hands clenched at her sides, hearing her father's voice for the first time in 2 years, steady and brave as he confronted men who would ultimately have him killed. The final recording was the worst. Marin started to play it, then stopped, her face going pale. "You should hear this," she said quietly, "but you should prepare yourself." Wren nodded. Her jaw was tight, her hands steady despite the trembling she felt inside. "Play it." The voice that came through the speakers was smooth, cultured, cold as ice. "You have a lovely family, Marcus." A pause, the sound of papers rustling. A wife named Evangeline, a daughter named Wren, and a son named Ezra. Another pause, longer this time. Wren could hear her father breathing, could hear the tension in his silence. It would be a shame if something were to happen to them, because their father could not see the big picture. Wren stopped the recording. Her whole body was shaking. The voice on the tape had spoken her name, her brother's name, with casual contempt. A threat delivered years ago that had ultimately been carried out. "That is Garrett Thornwood," Marin said softly, "Executive Vice President of Blackridge Mining, the man who gave the order." Wren had just heard the voice of the man who ordered her parents' death. She sat very still for a long time, staring at nothing. The recording had ended, but the voice seemed to echo in the small room, filling the spaces between the walls with its cold menace. "I want to pause here and ask you something important. If you were in Wren's place, 18 years old, alone, except for a few unlikely allies, facing a corporation with unlimited resources and a proven willingness to kill, what would you do? Would you have the courage to keep fighting, knowing that powerful men wanted you dead, that your brother's safety hung in the balance, that one wrong move could destroy everything? Would you keep fighting, or would you take the $2 million and disappear? Consider your answer carefully." The next morning, Wren called the foster home to check on Ezra. She had been calling every few days using the burner phone Harlan had given her, keeping the conversation short and careful. Ezra never said much, but she could hear the hope in his voice, the desperate wanting that he tried so hard to hide. This time, Mrs. Whitmore answered, and her voice was strange, tight, controlled. The voice of someone trying very hard not to panic. Wren. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Ice flooded Wren's veins. What happened? Is Ezra okay? He is fine. He is not hurt. But something happened yesterday that you need to know about. Mrs. Whitmore described the man who had come to the facility. He had credentials, proper ID, official paperwork, everything in order. He said he was conducting a routine welfare check on several children, including Ezra. But something about him had felt wrong. The way he asked questions, the specific details he wanted to know. He asked where you had gone, whether you had contacted Ezra, whether you had told him anything about your plans. Mrs. Whitmore's voice dropped. And then he asked about the property, the inheritance. He knew things, Wren, things that are not in any file. Wren gripped the phone so hard her knuckles went white. There is more, Mrs. Whitmore continued. After he left, I checked the visitor log. His name, his credentials, none of it checked out. The agency he claimed to work for does not exist. They knew about Ezra. They knew he was her weakness, the one person in the world she would do anything to protect. And they had sent someone to remind her of that fact. Did he talk to Ezra directly? For about 10 minutes, in the common room where I could see them. Ezra did not say much. You know how he is with strangers. But the man was watching your brother like he was memorizing him, like he was taking measurements. The threat was clear. We know where he is. We can reach him whenever we want. Wren's voice was steady when she spoke again, though inside she was screaming. Can I talk to him? A pause. Shuffling sounds. Then Ezra's voice, small and scared in a way she had never heard before. Wren, I am here. Are you okay? A long silence. He knew my name. Ezra's voice was barely a whisper. He asked if I wanted to see you again. He smiled when he said it, but it was not a nice smile. Wren closed her eyes, forced herself to breathe. Listen to me, Ezra. I need you to be brave for just a little longer. I'm almost done here. And when I'm finished, I'm coming to get you. No one is going to hurt you. Do you understand? Okay. His voice was small, trusting. The voice of a 14-year-old boy who had already lost everything once and was terrified of losing it again. I love you, Wren said. I will call again soon. She hung up the phone and stood very still for a long moment. Then she walked outside and screamed into the empty Montana sky until her throat was raw and her voice was gone. They were threatening her brother. They were using a 14-year-old boy as a weapon against her. And in that moment, standing in the shadow of the motionless windmill, Wren made a decision that would change everything. She would not just expose Blackridge, she would destroy them. She called Pemberton that afternoon. We need to move faster, she said. They are threatening Ezra, whatever it takes, however much risk we have to take. We need to finish this before they hurt my brother. The lawyer was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was grave. I understand. There is a journalist named Harper Ellison who has been investigating Blackridge for years. She has sources, credibility. If we give her the evidence, she can publish within days. Do it. There is also something else, Pemberton continued. A man named Colton Bryce. He was an environmental engineer at Blackridge for 15 years. He left the company 3 years ago, and ever since he has been trying to build up the courage to come forward. I have been in contact with him. He has seen the evidence your father collected. He is willing to testify, a witness, someone inside the company who could corroborate everything on the hard drive. Can we trust him? He is terrified, but his conscience has been eating him alive for years. I think he is finally ready to do the right thing, then set it up. Whatever he needs, whatever reassurances he wants. Make it happen, Pemberton agreed. The plan was in motion. Colton Bryce arrived in Driftwood 3 days later. He was a quiet man in his 50s with haunted eyes and hands that shook slightly when he was not clasping them together. He looked like someone who had not slept properly in years. Gray at the temples, deep lines around his mouth, the face of a man carrying a burden too heavy to bear. Wren met him at the farmhouse, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, while Marin kept watch by the window. I should have done this sooner, Bryce said, his voice cracking. His eyes could not seem to settle on anything. They moved around the room, touching surfaces, avoiding Wren's gaze. Your father came to me, before he tried to get me to join him, to be a second witness. He shook his head slowly. I was too scared. You are here now. It is not enough. His voice cracked. I could have saved them, if I had spoken up then, if I had been brave enough. You are here now, Ren repeated more firmly this time. That is what matters. We cannot change the past. We can only fight for the future. Bryce looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. A weight lifting, perhaps, or the beginning of something that might eventually become Sope. You sound like him, he said quietly. Your father. He used to say things like that. Over the next 2 days, Bryce told them everything. He described the dumping operations he had witnessed, the falsified reports he had been ordered to sign, the meetings where executives discussed the acceptable level of sickness in local communities, the casual way they talked about poisoning thousands of people as long as the liability could be managed. He gave them names, dates, locations, details that would corroborate every piece of evidence on the hard drive, and he agreed to testify in court if it came to that. 2 days before the article was scheduled to run, Ren's phone rang in the middle of the night. It was Colton Bryce. His voice was different, scared in a way she had not heard before. They found me. Ren sat up in bed, instantly alert. What happened? Someone has been following me. A car parked outside my motel for hours. Different cars, but always someone watching. I recognized one of them. He used to work security at Blackridge. A long pause. Ren could hear him breathing, could hear the fear in every exhale. I have to disappear for a few days. Go somewhere they cannot find me. No, we need you here. The article runs in 2 days, I know. And I will be there. I swear it. But I cannot stay at the motel. It is not safe. Where will you go? I have a place. Somewhere off the grid. I will be at the courthouse when it matters. You have my word. The line went dead. Ren sat in the darkness, staring at the phone in her hand. Their key witness had just gone into hiding, and she had no way to reach him. The next morning, everything got worse. Pemberton called with news that hit like a physical blow. Blackridge has filed a lawsuit. They are claiming you are an illegal squatter, that the property transfer was fraudulent. They are demanding immediate eviction. Ren's grip tightened on the phone. Can they do that? They can try. I'm already working on a response. But there is going to be a hearing. 4 days from now, you will have to appear before a judge. 4 days. 4 days to prove that she had a legal right to this land, this house, this life she was building from the ruins of her parents' dreams. There is something else, Pemberton continued. The article that Harper Ellison has been working on. She moved up her timeline. It is publishing tomorrow morning. By the time you walk into that courtroom, the whole country is going to know who Garrett Thornwood really is. A strange calm settled over Ren. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. In 4 days, one way or another, it would all be over. I will be ready, she said. That evening, Ren stood alone on the porch of her farmhouse, watching the sun set over the valley. The house looked different now. 3 weeks of work had transformed it from a ruin into something that was beginning to resemble a home. The porch was solid beneath her feet. Several windows had new glass gleaming in the fading light. The worst of the rot had been cut away and replaced with fresh lumber. It was not finished. It might never be finished. Not really. But it was hers. She thought about everything that had happened since her 18th birthday. The letter, the journey, the discovery in the cellar, the threats and the fire, and the men who wanted her dead. She thought about Ezra waiting in that institutional room, trusting her to build something worth coming home to. She thought about her parents who had died trying to protect her, trying to give her this chance. And she thought about the windmill standing tall and silent behind her, its rusted blades frozen against the darkening sky. 20 years since it had turned. 20 years of stillness. She wondered if it would ever move again. The burner phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and answered without looking at the screen. Miss Calloway. The voice was unfamiliar, female, professional. This is Harper Ellison, the journalist. Pemberton gave me your number. Ren straightened. The article, is it ready? It goes live at 6 tomorrow morning. Front page. I wanted to give you a heads up. A pause. But there is something else you should know. Wren waited. Blackridge knows the article is coming. They have been making calls all day, threatening legal action against the paper, trying to get us to kill the story, and we are not killing anything. But they are not just playing defense anymore. They are going on offense. What does that mean? It means they have announced that they have evidence you forged the inheritance documents, that the deed is fake, that you are a con artist trying to exploit your parents' death for money. Wren's blood ran cold. That is a lie, I know. But they are going to use it at the hearing. They are going to try to discredit you before you can testify. The sunset had faded to purple. The first stars were beginning to appear. The windmill stood in silhouette, a dark shape against the darkening sky. Let them try, Wren said quietly. I have the truth on my side. Harper Ellison was quiet for a moment. You really are his daughter, she said finally. Your father said almost the same thing to me once, years ago when he first reached out. You knew him. We spoke a few times. He was trying to find someone who would listen, someone who would help him expose what Blackridge was doing. I was young then, scared. I did not have the courage to take on a company that powerful. Her voice hardened. I have it now. Wren stood on the porch long after the call ended, watching the night deepen around her. Tomorrow the article would publish. In 4 days, she would face Blackridge in court. Somewhere out there, Colton Bryce was hiding, hopefully still planning to appear when it mattered. And somewhere in a foster home, hundreds of miles away, her brother was waiting for her to keep her promise. She pulled his drawing from her pocket. It was worn now, creased and softened by weeks of handling. But the image was still clear. The house, the windmill, the 2 figures standing in the doorway. I am coming, she whispered to the darkness. I'm almost there. She did not sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table with her mother's letters spread before her, reading them again by candlelight, searching for strength in the words of a woman who had faced this same enemy and lost. But Evangeline Calloway had not truly lost. She had planted seeds, hidden evidence, prepared her daughter for a fight she had known might one day come. And now those seeds were about to bear fruit. The false defeat pressed in around Wren in the small hours of the morning. Her witness was in hiding. Her enemies were preparing to destroy her credibility. She had no guarantee that anything would work the way she hoped. She was 18 years old. She was alone. She was fighting a corporation worth billions with nothing but the truth and her father's evidence and her own stubborn refusal to surrender. But then she looked at Ezra's drawing one more time. The house, the windmill, the 2 figures holding hands. He had drawn it before he knew it existed. He had seen this future somehow across miles and years, as though some part of him had always known where they were supposed to end up. If he could see it, then maybe it was real. Maybe it was possible. Maybe she could make it true. Wren folded the drawing carefully and placed it over her heart. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and watched the eastern sky begin to lighten with the first gray hints of dawn. The article would publish in 2 hours. The war was about to begin. And Wren Calloway was ready to fight. The article hit like a bomb at 6 in the morning. Harper Ellison had titled it, The Calloway Legacy Whistleblower's Daughter Exposes 20 Years of Corporate Poison. It ran on the front page of the state's largest newspaper, accompanied by photographs of contaminated land-grieving families and internal Blackridge documents that proved everything. Within an hour, it was the most read story on the newspaper's website. Within 3 hours, national outlets had picked it up. By noon, Garrett Thornwood's face was on every news channel in the country. Wren watched the coverage unfold on Marin's laptop, sitting at the kitchen table in the farmhouse that was slowly becoming a home. The reporters spoke in grave tones about corporate malfeasance and environmental destruction. They quoted from the audio recordings, playing clips of executives discussing acceptable casualty rates and manageable liability. They showed maps of the affected counties, the contamination spreading across the screen like a disease. And they told the story of Marcus and Evangeline Calloway, two parents who had discovered the truth and paid for it with their lives, two children left orphaned by corporate greed, a daughter who had inherited nothing but a ruined farmhouse and the courage to fight. The phone rang constantly, journalists wanting interviews, lawyers offering their services, strangers calling to express their support or their outrage, or simply to say that they were sorry for what had happened to her family. Wren let Maren handle most of it. She had more important things to focus on. The hearing was in 3 days. That evening, Pemberton called with an update. Black Ridge stock has dropped 40% since this morning. The EPA has announced a federal investigation. 3 senators who received campaign contributions from the company are suddenly unavailable for comment, Goodwren said. But they are not going down without a fight. Their lawyers are already spinning a counter-narrative. They are saying the documents were fabricated, that you are a troubled foster child who manufactured this whole thing for attention and money. Let them say whatever they want. The evidence speaks for itself. Pemberton was quiet for a moment. There is something else. Garrett Thornwood released a statement this afternoon. He is denying everything, calling the article a hit piece based on forged documents, and he says he intends to be at the hearing personally to expose what he calls your fraud. Wren's grip tightened on the phone. He is coming here. Apparently he wants to look you in the eye when his lawyers tear your case apart. His words, not mine. Something cold and sharp crystallized in Wren's chest. Good, she said again. I want to look him in the eye too. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Pemberton arrived in Driftwood to work on the legal strategy. He was an older man, methodical and precise, with the calm demeanor of someone who had spent decades navigating courtrooms. He had known her parents had helped them set up the trust that purchased this land, had been waiting years for this moment. We have the evidence, he told her, spreading documents across the kitchen table. We have the recordings. We have witnesses willing to testify about the health effects in their communities. He paused, his expression grave. But Colton Bryce has not resurfaced. If he does not appear at the hearing, we lose our inside witness. It will be your word against theirs. He will be there, Wren said. She was not sure she believed it, but she had to believe something. The night before the hearing, she could not sleep. She walked the property in the darkness, her footsteps quiet on the ground her parents had bought with their savings and their hope. The windmill loomed against the stars, its frozen blades silver in the moonlight. The house stood solid behind her, no longer quite so ruined, no longer quite so lost. She had built this. Board by board, nail by nail, she had taken a ruin and begun to make it whole. Tomorrow she would find out if it had been enough. She thought about her father, who had walked into his supervisor's office with evidence of corporate crimes, knowing what it might cost him. She thought about her mother, who had written letters to children she might never see again, preparing them for a future she would not share. She thought about Ezra, alone in that institutional room, waiting for his sister to keep her promise. And she thought about Garrett Thornwood, the voice on the recording, the man who had spoken her name and her brother's name as threats, the man who had ordered her parents' death as casually as another person might order lunch. Tomorrow she would face him. Tomorrow, one way or another, it would end. She returned to the house as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Maren was already awake, making coffee in the kitchen. Harlan Becker sat at the table, his weathered face grave in the early morning light. The old man had insisted on coming. My son died because of them, he had said when Wren tried to convince him to stay home. I have been waiting 15 years to see someone held accountable. I'm not missing this. Now he looked at her with eyes that had seen too much loss, too much waiting, too much injustice. You ready? Wren poured herself a cup of coffee. Her hands were steady. I have been ready for 2 years. The courthouse was a small brick building in the center of Cedar Hollow, the kind of structure that had served its community for generations. But today it was transformed. News vans lined the street. Reporters clustered on the steps, cameras at the ready. Curious locals gathered on the sidewalks, drawn by the spectacle unfolding in their quiet town. Wren walked through the crowd with Pemberton at her side, Maren and Harlan following close behind. She kept her eyes forward, her expression calm, refusing to acknowledge the shouted questions from the press. Inside, the hearing room was packed. Journalists filled the gallery, notebooks and recording devices at the ready. Representatives from environmental groups occupied one section. Families from the affected communities sat together, their faces marked by the same grief and anger that Wren carried in her own heart. And in the front row, directly behind the table where Blackridge's lawyers were arranging their papers, sat Garrett Thornwood. Wren saw him the moment she entered the room. He was smaller than she had expected, compact and precisely dressed in a suit that probably cost more than the farmhouse she was trying to save. Silver hair swept back from a face that might have been handsome once before. Whatever was inside him had begun to show through. Eyes the color of winter ice. He was watching her. As she walked down the aisle toward the plaintiff's table, his gaze followed her with an intensity that felt almost physical. When she met his eyes, he smiled. It was a thin smile, a cold smile, the smile of a man who had ordered families destroyed and slept soundly afterward. Wren did not look away. She held his gaze as she took her seat, letting him see that she was not afraid of him, that his money and his power and his lawyers could not make her back down. His smile flickered, just for a moment. Then the judge entered and the hearing began. Blackridge's lead attorney was a sharp-faced man named Harrison. He was expensive and ruthless, the kind of lawyer that corporations keep on retainer for exactly these situations. He went after Wren with surgical precision. "Your Honor, this entire case is built on a foundation of fraud. The plaintiff claims to have inherited this property from her parents, but our expert analysis indicates that the deed transfer documents contain significant irregularities. We believe they were forged." He produced a thick folder of papers, presenting them to the judge with the practiced confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Furthermore, the plaintiff is an 18-year-old former foster child with no stable employment, no permanent address, and no verifiable source of income. She appeared in Driftwood less than a month ago and immediately began making wild accusations against one of Montana's most respected corporations. Harrison paused, letting his words sink in. "This is not a case about environmental justice, Your Honor. This is a case about a troubled young woman who saw an opportunity to exploit her parents' tragic death for personal gain." Wren listened without expression. She had known this was coming. Pemberton had warned her that Blackridge would try to make the case about her rather than about the evidence. They would attack her credibility, her background, her youth. They would try to make her seem unstable and untrustworthy, but they had made a mistake. They had assumed she was just a frightened girl who would crumble under pressure. They did not know who they were dealing with. Pemberton rose to respond. "Your Honor, my client has provided extensive documentation proving the legitimacy of the property transfer. The trust was established by Marcus and Evangeline Calloway 6 years ago using funds from their personal savings. The deed was properly recorded with the county. All paperwork was reviewed and notarized by licensed professionals." He produced his own folder, equally thick. "As for the accusations of fraud, I would note that Blackridge Mining has considerable motivation to discredit my client. The evidence she has provided to journalists and law enforcement implicates their executives in serious crimes, including environmental destruction, falsification of government documents, and potentially even murder." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The judge raised his hand for silence. "This hearing is about property rights, not criminal allegations. Let us stay focused on the matter at hand." "Of course, Your Honor," Pemberton said smoothly. "But the matter at hand is whether my client has legal claim to property that her parents purchased legally and left to her through proper legal channels. The answer is yes. Blackridge's claims of fraud are nothing more than an attempt to silence a whistleblower by stealing her home." Harrison rose to object, and the legal back and forth continued for what felt like hours. Witnesses were called, documents were examined, experts testified about signatures and property records and the technical details of trust law. Through it all, Wren sat quietly at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. But inside, she was watching the clock. Colton Bryce had not appeared. The morning stretched into afternoon. The gallery grew restless. The judge called for a lunch recess, then reconvened, and still there was no sign of the one witness who could corroborate everything. Pemberton leaned close to her during a pause in the proceedings. "We may have to proceed without him," he whispered. "Can you do this alone?" Wren looked at Garrett Thornwood, who was watching her from across the room with that same cold smile. "I was always going to have to do this alone," she said. "He would just have made it easier." The afternoon session began with Harrison calling his own expert witness, a document analyst who testified at length about supposed irregularities in the deed. The man spoke in technical jargon, attempting to create doubt where none should exist. Wren listened, waited, and tried not to look at the door. And then, just as Harrison was preparing to call his next witness, the door opened. Every head in the room turned. Colton Bryce stood in the doorway. He looked worse than the last time Wren had seen him. Exhausted, unshaven, his clothes rumpled as though he had been sleeping in them for days. But he was there. He was standing straight, and in his hand he held a small recording device. "Your Honor," Pemberton said, rising quickly, "I request permission to call an additional witness." The judge looked at Bryce, then at the recording device, then at the stunned faces of Blackridge's legal team. Permission granted. Bryce walked to the witness stand. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he took the oath. And then he began to talk. He told them everything. 15 years of witnessing environmental crimes, falsified reports he had been ordered to sign, dumping operations conducted in the dead-of-night barrels of toxic waste buried in unmarked locations across 5 counties, meetings where executives discussed the acceptable rate of cancer in local populations as though they were discussing quarterly projections. He named names, gave dates, described locations that matched perfectly with the contamination zones in Marcus Calloway's evidence. And then he held up the recording device. "I was contacted by Blackridge representatives 3 days ago," he said. "They wanted to discuss my potential testimony." I recorded the conversation. Harrison leaped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This recording was made without consent. It cannot be admitted as evidence." The judge looked at Bryce. "What does the recording contain?" Bryce met Garrett Thornwood's eyes for the first time. "It contains a discussion of how to handle witnesses who might testify against the company. They mentioned several names, including Harlan Becker, who is sitting in this courtroom right now." A gasp went through the gallery. They discussed. Bryce continued, his voice shaking but clear, making him have an accident. The same kind of accident that happened to Marcus and Evangeline Calloway. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. Harrison was shouting objections. Journalists were typing frantically on their phones. And in the front row, Garrett Thornwood's face had gone pale as chalk. "I will hear the recording," the judge said when the noise finally subsided. "Court will recess for 15 minutes while I review it in chambers." The wait was the longest 15 minutes of Wren's life. She sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands folded, her breathing steady. Around her, the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations and barely contained tension. Marin squeezed her shoulder. Harlan sat rigid in his seat, his face carved from stone. And across the room, Garrett Thornwood was in urgent whispered consultation with his lawyers. When the judge returned, his expression was grave. "I have reviewed the recording," he said. "While its admissibility as evidence will need to be determined in subsequent proceedings, I've heard enough to have serious concerns about the conduct of certain parties in this case." He turned to look directly at Thornwood. "Mr. Thornwood, you may want to contact Criminal Defense Counsel. I will be referring this matter to the FBI for investigation." Harrison rose to object, but the judge cut him off with a wave of his hand. "We are here to determine property rights, and that is what I intend to do. I have reviewed the documentation provided by both parties. The trust establishing the plaintiff's ownership was properly executed and recorded. The deed transfer is valid on its face. I find no credible evidence of fraud." He picked up his gavel. "The plaintiff's claim to the property in Driftwood, Montana is hereby affirmed. This case is dismissed." The gavel came down. For a moment's silence. Then the courtroom exploded into chaos. Wren remained seated while the storm raged around her. She didn't hear the journalists shouting questions. She didn't see the marshals moving toward Garrett Thornwood. She didn't notice Pemberton shaking her hand, or Marin hugging her, or Harlan Becker weeping openly for the first time in 15 years. She was looking at Garrett Thornwood, and Garrett Thornwood was looking at her. Their eyes met across the chaotic courtroom, and for one long moment, the world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them. The man who had ordered her parents killed and the daughter who had brought him down. His face was twisted with fury, with disbelief, with the dawning realization that everything he had built was about to collapse. Wren stood slowly. She walked toward him. The crowd parted around her, sensing something significant in her movement. Journalists raised their cameras. The marshals paused their approach. Even Harrison fell silent, watching. Wren stopped directly in front of Garrett Thornwood. He was smaller than she had imagined, shorter, older, just a man in an expensive suit with ice-blue eyes that had finally lost their cold confidence. "You called my family a problem to be handled," she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the hushed courtroom it carried to every corner. "You ordered my parents killed because my father had the courage to tell the truth. You thought that would be the end of it. You thought dead whistleblowers could not testify." She leaned closer. "You were wrong." Thornwood's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "My father started this story," Wren continued. "You thought killing him would end it, but all you did was add a comma, and I'm here to write the rest." She stepped back. "Enjoy prison." The marshals moved in, then taking Thornwood by the arms. He was still staring at her as they led him away, his face a mask of impotent rage. Wren watched him go, and then finally she allowed herself to breathe. The aftermath unfolded in waves. Federal agents arrived by evening, securing the courthouse and beginning the process of taking statements. 3 other Black Ridge executives were arrested within hours, their names released to the press, alongside mounting evidence of corporate crimes spanning 2 decades. The company's stock, already battered, collapsed entirely. Trading was suspended pending investigation. Lawyers began circling like sharks, preparing the class action lawsuits that would eventually result in billions of dollars in settlements for affected families. And in small towns across Montana, people who had been sick for years finally had an explanation. Families who had buried loved ones finally had someone to blame. Wren did not stay for any of it. As soon as the formal proceedings ended, she slipped out a side door with Pemberton's help, avoiding the journalists still clamoring for statements. Marin was waiting with the truck. "We need to get Harlan home," she said. "He is exhausted." The old man was sitting in the passenger seat, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. The day had taken everything out of him. 15 years of waiting, of grief, of hoping for justice that seemed like it would never come. And now it was here, and he had nothing left. They drove back to Driftwood in silence. The sun was setting as they pulled up to Harlan's small house on the edge of town. Marin helped him inside while Wren waited by the truck, watching the sky turn gold and crimson above the mountains. When Marin came back out, her eyes were wet. "He asked me to tell you something." Wren waited. "He said he is proud of you. He said his son would have been proud too." Wren nodded slowly. "Tell him I could not have done it without him. The phone, the information, just knowing I was not alone." "I will." Marin hugged her tightly. "You did it, Wren. You actually did it." "Not yet," Wren said. "I still have one more thing to do." That night, alone in the farmhouse, Wren sat at the kitchen table and looked at Ezra's drawing, the house, the windmill, the 2 figures in the doorway. Tomorrow she would drive to the city and bring her brother home. The phone rang just after midnight. Wren answered it in the darkness of her bedroom, still half asleep, expecting Pemberton or Marin, or perhaps another journalist who had somehow gotten her number. Instead, she heard Marin's voice, cracked and broken. "Wren, "It is grandfather." A pause. "He passed away an hour ago in his sleep." Wren sat very still. The old man who had trusted her, helped her, believed in her when she had given him no reason to, who had waited 15 years for justice for his son, who had lived just long enough to see it arrive. And then he had let go. "I'm so sorry," Wren whispered. "He was smiling," Maren said. "When we found him, he was smiling." Wren stayed on the phone for a long time, listening to Maren cry, offering what comfort she could across the distance. When the call finally ended, she walked out onto the porch and stood in the cold night air, looking up at the stars. The windmill loomed beside her, its blades still frozen, still waiting. She thought about Harlan Becker, who had lost his son and spent 15 years seeking answers that never came, who had given a frightened girl a lifeline when she needed it most, who had seen justice delivered and then quietly slipped away, his work finally done. She thought about all the others like him, all the families across 5 counties who had watched loved ones sicken and die without understanding why, all the graves that held people who should still be alive, her parents' graves among them. "We did it," she said quietly to the darkness. "All of us. Together." The wind stirred, just for a moment. The blades of the windmill creaked, but didn't move. Soon, Wren thought, soon you will turn again. She buried Harlan Becker beside his son on a gray morning 3 days later. The whole town came, such as it was. A handful of old-timers who remembered Driftwood before the poison came. Families from neighboring communities who had known Harlan as a friend and ally. Maren stood beside the grave with red eyes and squared shoulders, accepting condolences with the same quiet strength her grandfather had shown. Wren stood apart, watching the simple ceremony, thinking about endings and beginnings. When it was over, when the last mourner had drifted away, she walked to the grave and stood there alone. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for believing in me, for giving me a chance." The wind moved through the cemetery, rustling the dry grass. "I will take care of Maren," she continued, "and I will make sure everyone remembers what you did, what you sacrificed." She placed her hand on the cold headstone. "Rest now. You have earned it." 1 week after the hearing, Wren drove to the city to bring her brother home. Pemberton had worked miracles with the custody paperwork. The combination of Wren's newfound stability, the settlement money that was beginning to flow from Blackridge's crumbling empire, and the home she had built in Driftwood had convinced a judge that she was capable of providing for her brother. The foster care system for once had been forced to acknowledge that sometimes the best place for a child was with family. She pulled up to the facility in the old pickup truck she had finally gotten running, its engine coughing and sputtering but reliable. The building looked different now, almost smaller, less intimidating. It was just a brick structure with institutional windows, a way station she had finally left behind. Ezra was waiting in the lobby. He had a single backpack at his feet, the same one he had arrived with 2 years ago. His sketchbook was clutched to his chest. He looked older than when she had left him, taller somehow, though it had only been a month. But his face was the same. Those serious eyes. That guarded expression that softened only when he saw his sister walking through the door. She did not say anything. She just opened her arms. He ran to her. They held each other for a long time there in the lobby, while Mrs. Whitmore watched with tears in her eyes. 2 children who had lost everything finding each other again. 2 survivors who had made it through the darkness and come out the other side. "Ready?" Wren finally asked, pulling back to look at his face. "Ready." She took his hand and led him out to the truck. The drive back to Driftwood took 4 hours. Ezra spent most of it staring out the window, watching the landscape transform from city to suburb to farmland to wilderness. Wren watched him from the corner of her eye, seeing the tension slowly drain from his shoulders. As the miles passed, he did not speak. He rarely did, but his silence was different now. Not the guarded, frightened silence of the foster home, something more peaceful, more anticipatory. When they turned onto Miller Road and the farmhouse came into view, he sat up straighter. "Is that it?" Wren nodded. "Is that the windmill just like you drew it?" They pulled up to the house and got out. The building looked different now than it had when Wren first arrived. The porch no longer sagged. Several windows gleamed with new glass. Fresh lumber showed pale against the weathered gray of the original boards. It was not finished. There was still so much work to do. But it was a home. Their home. Ezra stood in the yard, his sketchbook still clutched to his chest, his eyes moving slowly across the property, taking in every detail, comparing it, she knew, to the images he had drawn so many times in his institutional room. "Wow," he breathed. "It is real," Wren said. "It is actually real." They spent the rest of the day exploring. She showed him the creek where she drew water, the barn where their father's workshop waited, his tools still hanging in neat rows on the pegboard, the patch of earth she had cleared for a garden, the cellar where she had found the milk can with its fortune and its secrets. She showed him the notebooks their father had written, the careful instructions for building and repairing, and Ezra looked at them with something like wonder, his fingers tracing the diagrams as though he could feel his father's presence in the careful lines, and she showed him the letters their mother had written. They sat together on the new porch as the afternoon faded, reading Evangeline's words, letting her voice fill the space between them. Ezra cried quietly, tears running down his cheeks, but he didn't look away from the pages. "They loved us," he said when they had finished. "They really loved us." "They did," Wren agreed. "They loved us enough to die for us, and they loved us enough to give us this chance." That evening, as the sun began to set, they climbed the windmill together. It was easier than it had been when Wren first arrived. She had spent weeks working on the mechanism, straightening the bent struts, oiling the joints, clearing away 2 decades of rust and neglect. The metal was still old, still weathered, but no longer seized. They climbed the ladder to the platform high above the ground and looked out over the valley that was theirs. The farmhouse sat below them, solid and waiting. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with the first pink light of sunset. The sky stretched endless and blue, streaked with clouds that caught the fading light like fire. "It is beautiful," Ezra said softly. "Help me push." They braced themselves against one of the massive blades. Wren felt her brother's shoulder against hers, felt the solid warmth of his presence beside her for the first time in a month. "On 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. They pushed. For a moment, nothing happened. The old metal groaned, resisting. Decades of stillness fought against them, the weight of all those frozen years pressing back. They pushed harder. And then slowly, impossibly, something gave way. The blade moved, then the next, and the next. The windmill began to turn. It was slow at first, hesitant, like something waking from a very long sleep. The metal creaked and complained, joints that had not moved in 20 years, remembering what motion felt like. But as the evening wind caught the blades, the rotation strengthened. A low humming sound filled the air, deep and steady like a heartbeat, like breathing. Wren remembered what Harlan had told her that day in his store when he gave her the burner phone. "When I was a boy, that thing used to turn all the time. You could hear it from town. I always thought it sounded like the land itself breathing." The land was breathing again. Tears streamed down Wren's face, but she was smiling. Beside her, Ezra was watching the blades turn with an expression of pure wonder, his serious face transformed by joy she had not seen in years. "We did it," he whispered. "We did it," she agreed, together. They stood on that platform for a long time, watching the windmill turn, watching the sun set, watching the stars begin to appear one by one in the darkening sky. 2 children who had lost everything. 2 survivors who had found their way home. 1 year later, the farmhouse was complete. It had taken 12 months of hard work, of learning and failing and trying again. Marin had moved in to help, claiming she was doing research for her journalism thesis, but really just wanting to be part of something good. Together, they had transformed the ruin into a home. The porch stretched wide and welcoming across the front of the house, furnished with rocking chairs that Wren had built herself, following instructions in one of her father's notebooks. Hanging baskets of flowers swayed in the breeze. The windows sparkled in the sunlight, clean and whole. Inside, the rooms were warm and bright. Furniture they had found at estate sales and refinished together. Artwork that Ezra had created, his drawings now framed and hung with pride. Books on shelves that their father had built, finally filled with volumes their mother would have loved. The garden flourished. They had planted it according to notes found in Evangeline's journals, following her careful instructions for what grew well in Montana soil. Now, vegetables spilled from raised beds, and a row of rose bushes bloomed along the fence. The roses their mother had always dreamed of growing, finally putting down roots in the earth she had chosen for her family. The windmill turned every day now, its blades catching the endless Montana wind. They had connected it to a small generator, enough to power lights and a few appliances. But that was not what mattered. What mattered was the sound it made, that low, steady hum, the heartbeat of a land that was alive again. The settlement money had established a foundation in their parents' name. The Callaway Foundation, it was called, providing legal aid to other whistleblowers who found themselves in danger, funding cancer treatment for families in affected communities, supporting environmental cleanup efforts that would take decades to complete. Garrett Thornwood was serving 25 years in federal prison. His fellow executives had received similar sentences. Black Ridge Mining no longer existed, its assets liquidated to pay settlements, its name erased from the corporate landscape. And on the mantel in the living room, in a place of honor, sat the silver locket. Wren had finally added Ezra's picture to the empty space. A school photo taken just after he arrived in Driftwood, his serious face finally showing a hint of the smile that came more easily now. All four Callaways were together in that small silver frame. Marcus and Evangeline on their wedding day, young and hopeful, their whole lives ahead of them. And their children finally home. On a warm summer evening, Wren sat on the porch with Ezra beside her, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Marin was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of something good drifted through the open windows. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing its evening song. The windmill turned steadily, its shadow stretching long across the yard. "Do you ever think about what would have happened?" Ezra asked quietly. "If you had not come here, if you had just taken the money and walked away?" Wren considered the question. "Sometimes. Late at night when I cannot sleep, I think about the easy path, the one that led away from all of this." She paused, watching the windmill's steady rotation against the darkening sky. "But then I remember something Mom wrote in one of her letters. She said that home is not a place you are given. It is a place you build. Sometimes you have to build it from ruins. Sometimes you have to fight for the ground it stands on." Ezra nodded slowly. "I like it here," he said. "I like who we are becoming. Me too." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars their parents had once watched from the same porch, dreaming of the life they wanted to build for their children. "Hey, Wren. Yeah, thanks for coming back for me, for building this." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "Always," she said. "That is what family does." The night deepened around them, but the house glowed with warmth and light. Inside, dinner was waiting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new opportunities to tend the life they were growing together. But for now, there was only this moment. Two siblings on a porch, watching the stars come out over the land their parents had given them. A windmill turning slowly in the evening breeze. A home built from love and courage and stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. This is how the story ends. Not with a grand finale or a dramatic revelation, but with the quiet truth that matters most. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply stay. Plant your feet, build your home, fight for the people you love, and never ever let them take it from you. Wren looked at her brother, at the home they had built at the windmill, turning against the star-filled sky. She thought about her parents who had loved them enough to die for them. She thought about Harlan Becker, who had waited 15 years for justice and lived just long enough to see it arrive. She thought about all the families across Montana who were finally getting answers, finally getting treatment, finally getting the chance to heal. And she thought about herself, 18 years old when this started, a foster kid with nothing but a letter and a key and a promise to keep. Now 19, a homeowner, a sister. A daughter who had honored her parents' memory in the only way that mattered, by fighting for the truth, by refusing to give up, by building something beautiful from the ruins of tragedy. The wind shifted and the windmill's hum changed pitch slightly. The blades turned faster for a moment, then settled back into their steady rhythm. Wren smiled. "You are still here," she whispered to the darkness, "still watching over us." The wind stirred her hair gentle as a touch, and somewhere out there she knew her parents were finally at peace.